everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with a nonfiction review for Not So Sorry, Abusers, False Apologies, and the Limits of Forgiveness by Kaya Oakes. I did receive this copy in exchange for an honest review, and I'm very grateful for that. I believe that the day I'm posting this review is the day after the book's release, so it is available to get now, and as I said, it is a nonfiction book. I have really loved the other nonfiction books I've read by Kaya Oakes. I actually have a full review on another one, which I will link below too. This is a look at how to view forgiveness and how to kind of unpack the way that forced forgiveness is weaponized, the way it harms victims, and how we can be a community, be an individual who allows and encourages people to change and improve while also not letting people continue to harm. So a lot of what she talks about in this book is especially connected to like the abuse crisis in the Catholic Church and in just Christianity and religion more generally. But the things that she talks about, the way that she looks at specifically American culture and the obsession with forgiveness to the point of, again, weaponizing it, using it to harm victims, those things can be applied to other areas of life as well. So I thought this was absolutely fantastic. As I said, I have enjoyed Kaya Oakes before. She's one of my favorite nonfiction writers, and I think this is such an important and well done book. It's also like surprisingly short. I feel like the other books I've read from her have also surprised me with how short they are, because she is still so thoughtful. She manages to cover so much while still, I feel like, giving the appropriate depth and time to different parts of the topics. And I really love just the ideas that she communicates here, the way that she supports them with other examples and quotations, the way that she analyzes this. Again, like, a lot of it is looking at the kind of Christian underpinnings of the way that America especially, but just society in general, views forgiveness and kind of like forces it or expects it to the point of forcing it. And even if you are not religious yourself, those things really do provide a significant foundation for the way that forgiveness is viewed and expected in a lot of different societies today. So just some of the ideas that she handles here that, again, I thought were really excellent in the way that she chose them and supported them and wrote about them. One of the biggest ones is something that is like shockingly simple in a way, but the idea that if somebody isn't actually sorry, they can't be forgiven. I think it bears repeating. If somebody is not sorry, they cannot be forgiven. And that in itself is just like already pretty big stance to take, a pretty dramatic one, but I think that's true. I think most people would recognize that even the most forgiving person would have an expectation that the person means it when they are asking them for forgiveness. Like, an apology has to be sincere or it's not an apology. Most people recognize that, and I feel like the way that Kaya Oakes takes that idea and expands it is, again, just really, really smart. I also really liked the way that she used some very specific examples from Christian teachings that have, again, formed a lot of American foundation for forgiveness, and she has looked at them in different ways that suggests or shows that maybe they're not saying what we think they are, or that a lot of people have said that they are. Like, for example, the words of Jesus on the cross, which are used very often to encourage this kind of like, you must forgive everyone everything, but the way that she points out that what he says is, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is a very specific thing in a very specific context, and that is not usually how that line, that verse is used. I also like that at the end of the book, we get a little glimpse of some alternatives, or even not even necessarily alternatives to forgiveness, but like forgiveness has to be a part of justice and atonement. It can't be instead of. So things like liberation theology, restorative justice, atonement, and like actually repairing what is wrong and changing and doing better. Another thing that she highlights multiple times that, again, I think is really important is that institutions doing really important and wonderful work does not mean that we have to give them a pass for doing bad things too, or for like allowing bad things to happen, or for Like, it's not an either or situation. And yeah, that's messy and complicated, but that has to be something that we accept, you know? Like, she talks about several like charities or nonprofits that are like that, and I think she does a really good job of handling that balance. And then finally, and this is like not a main focus of the book, but something that I have really liked and appreciated and admired from the other books and this one that I've read by Kaya Oakes, is that when she talks about like institutional religion, and especially in modern times, the things that are making a lot of like especially younger people leave that, I feel like she does a really excellent job of being very compassionate and understanding for people who leave, but also for people who stay. And I feel like that second part is much less common, at least in things that I've read. I just really like the way that she writes about the perspective of people who do stay and who do try and, you know, create change from within, and who are very cognizant of the horrible things that different belief systems, especially in Christianity, have done, while also acknowledging that there may be reasons that people do still find meaning there. So that's just kind of like an overview of some of the like topics and ideas that Kaya Oakes like brings up and discusses. As I said, I think that the sort of meat of the book was really excellent, and I also feel like the writing and the sort of like organizational elements were fantastic too. Something that I always appreciate in nonfiction is when I feel like an author has like the perfect amount of quoted sources, because, you know, if you have too many of them, it can feel a little bit, not disjointed exactly, but it can just feel a little too crowded, or it can almost feel like it's a series of other people's ideas that are just sort of like strung together. And I never feel like Kaya Oakes does that. Like, she definitely uses writings and quotations from other theologians, from other like writers. Especially, she emphasizes quoting people who are experts in their field that she maybe isn't. Like when she's talking about how Jesus as a Jewish person would have viewed forgiveness very differently from how like American Christians do today, she quotes actual like Jewish theologians, which I think is really important. And I also personally like that she doesn't default to quoting people who are more like historians, who are outside religion and who probably have like different perspectives on it. Like, I think it is important to have like some of those perspectives in different books like this, but I like that she doesn't automatically assume that those experts are more expert, you know, than people who are like within belief systems. Also, just her writing style itself, I really like. I find it very like clear and thoughtful. I like the kind of compassion and understanding that she writes with, and I think she does a fantastic job of again, getting in-depth enough on these ideas without making it confusing. I do think that there are some parts of this book and of her other books where, like, yes, because she is specifically writing, like, most of her writing does have to do with the Catholic Church. Like, yes, there are some parts of it that are more specific to that, like, to that experience, but I feel like she does a pretty good job of summarizing the basic information that you would need to know if you were not somebody familiar with that. And I'll read a few quotes at the end of my review to give you a little sampling of her writing and of her ideas, but yeah, her writing style in general I just really enjoy, and I think that she's a great recommendation even for people who are hesitant about picking up nonfiction. As far as things I would have wanted more from in the book, or more of, there's really only two things, and each of these is not even really, like, it doesn't even really feel like a critique of the book for several reasons. One of them is that I would have liked to see even more time and material devoted to alternatives, but again, I don't necessarily hold that against the book, because I think like her specific focus was on like the history of how we got here, and on the like weaponizing of forgiveness and how that hurts victims, how that actually impedes healing, and like various topics associated with that. So I think that like her focus necessarily wasn't on like, here's what people are doing to fix the problem, or here's how we can try to fix the problem. And again, we do get a little bit of that at the end, which I like. And also, as she points out several times, unfortunately, it's not that people aren't doing these alternative methods, it's just that they don't get the same like attention and page time that the sort of romanticizing of forgiveness tends to get. So again, not holding it against the book, I just would have liked to see that more. And then the other thing is, again, just something that I want to see in books more generally. Obviously, one of the things that this book deals a lot with is with sexual abuse, and especially the sexual abuse crisis in American Christianity. By the way, I will put content warnings in the review, in the description box if I didn't already mention that. So Kaya Oakes does talk about that a lot, and I think she does a really good job job of handling that topic, but I feel like where she connects it to certain other religious ideas and teachings, for example, when she's talking about like the honoring of the Virgin Mary, or of like celibate clergy in Catholicism, things like that, it would be nice to see a critique of the focus on sexuality, like also from the other direction. Like, I think it is incredibly important that writers continue to talk about the, fetishizing of virginity and the way that that has so much like affected practices of religion, and the way that that can be very harmful. So I absolutely think that that should be a main focus. I also, though, just think from like reading various books or articles that deal with these topics, it would be nice to see, especially in our modern day, where we understand more about like asexuality and people just having different like ethics or beliefs or like orientations, things like that. I think it would be nice to see an acknowledgement that, it might also say something not great about a person or society where something has to involve sex for it to be meaningful, or for it to be like truly like of the world, Maybe that's an overly specific critique, but that's just something I'd like to see from books more generally. Although when she is talking about the, for example, the canonization of Maria Goretti, I think that is an area where Kaya, like, I really like the way that Kaya Oaks like talked about this canonizing of young girls for the way that they died, basically from sexual violence, or from somebody attempting sexual violence on them. Probably pretty clear that I really loved Not So Sorry. Like, obviously it does deal with some very heavy things, some very heavy material, but I think it's done in a very thoughtful and compassionate way. I think Kaya Oaks is so smart. I love her writing. I think this is a really important and relevant book, especially right now. Yeah, just really incredible. I gave Not So Sorry 5 stars, and as I said, I'm going to end with just a few quotations that I will share from this finished copy. So as far as I know, they're not subject to change, and I'll try not to share too many quotes, but I just really loved this book and I love this author, so I want to give you a little bit of a sense of how she writes and the kinds of ideas that this book deals with. Page 6. South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which shed a global light on the atrocities of apartheid, worked to demonstrate that unless those atrocities were made public, reconciliation would never really be possible, and the nation would never really be unified. Bishop Desmond Tutu, a member of that commission, was clearly influenced by the words of Jesus from the Gospel of Luke, "For nothing is hidden that will not be disclosed, nor is anything secret that will not become known and come to light." Divine forgiveness, however, can be difficult to grasp and explain. Who can really know the mind of God? If forgiveness is in God's hands, as Jesus says on the cross, how do we know when or if God has forgiven us? Christian theologians, beginning with the Apostle Paul, have made claims about the conditions under which God's forgiveness takes place. But the existential truth is that we can't and don't truly know. We can only assume that some combination of atonement, right behavior, amends, and apology will get us close enough for God to grant us forgiveness. In Catholicism, the priest, acting in persona Christi, does the forgiving on God's behalf in the sacrament of reconciliation, more commonly known as confession. But forgiveness in confession always comes with penance of some sort, or else it's understood that it doesn't work. Page 56. It's overly simplistic to say that Protestants think forgiveness comes from God alone, and Catholics think it requires God, good works, and sacramental forgiveness from a priest. But the truth is that Protestant emphasis on forgiveness without the mediation of clergy has meant that Americans see forgiveness as a more individualistic process than the idea in the Hebrew Bible that it is meant to bring a person back into community. Page 77. When we talk about apologies and forgiveness, much of our focus is on forgiveness as an unburdening for the person who's done wrong. Once someone is absolved, they are now free to go about their lives. But for the person being asked for forgiveness, absolution is not always possible. It's also, in fact, adding yet another burden for a person who is already carrying the burden of the behavior that injured them, whether psychologically or physically. Because the offender offers an apology with the expectation of forgiveness and its ensuing freedom, when forgiveness is not offered or not possible, sometimes the result is increased resentment on behalf of the violator. We don't know how Pope Francis felt when some of the people he spoke to in Canada later said they felt like his apologies rang hollow or weren't enough. But we do know it's unlikely, given his age and health, that he'll visit Canada again. The story, for him, was effectively over as soon as his plane touched down in Rome. For the First Nations people, it is not. Page 101. Many of us who write about abuse do so because we are believers ourselves, and for us this is an issue of justice. We strive to do this work not with pity, which is looking down on someone, not a responsibility resting on the shoulders of those who have been abused. And I didn't really mention this book. One of the chapters in the book is actually about the concept of self-forgiveness and how obviously a reliance on that or too much of that can be incredibly, dangerous and again ripe for abuse. But Kaya Oaks also does talk about how that can be very difficult for victims and for people in general. So it is a struggle to forgive myself for being part of a religious institution that enables and even platforms destructive people, even while the same religious institution feeds my mind, soul, scholarly, and creative work. This is a bind that untold others likely find themselves in. Deconstruction and the ensuing journey to self-forgiveness can be a privilege, because in some cases it's impossible or not even desirable for a person to sever themselves from their faith. And then finally, I tried not to include a lot of quotes that were quoting other works, but I did pick one that I think is a really good one to show, and again is a good demonstration of this book. Page 133, this is when discussing the abuse scandal in the U.S. gymnastics team from Larry Nassar, Rachel Den Hollander, who was the first woman to come forward and publicly accuse him. Den Hollander's essay for Christianity Today is entitled, "My Larry Nassar Statement Went Viral, but There's More to the Gospel Than Forgiveness." In it, Den Hollander says, Christians assume that if the victim just forgives, all of the feelings are going to go away, and she adds that the media rushed to headlines that she had forgiven Nassar. However, according to Den Hollander, very few, if any of them, have recognized what else came with that statement, which was a swift and intentional pursuit of God's justice. In her victim impact statement, Den Hollander also actively problematizes this easy picture of forgiveness by stating that she hopes God will forgive Nassar someday, because he needs God's forgiveness more than hers. The rest of the statement is focused on Nassar's actions, which she describes as evil and wicked. She speaks of the horror felt in the courtroom, and she pleads for a maximum sentence. When Christian media glossed over this part of her statement and seized instead on a message of forgiveness, they created a distortion of not only her words, but the similar statements given by other victims of Nassar. Den Hollander says that what people forget when they talk about sexual assault and forgiveness is that it doesn't necessarily mean that being forgiving is the end of a victim's suffering. The suffering here on earth is very real, she told Christianity Today, and it does not go away simply because you forgive and release bitterness. Sorry, I know I don't usually share that many quotations, but it felt like an important part of this review for this book for me. But let me know if you are interested in this book, if you have read any of Kaya Oaks' works before. I obviously thought this was really excellent, and I just really love her perspective and the way that she writes it and the kinds of issues that she deals with. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you